Hi, my name's Phil. I like to talk about politics, and with the likely form of Brexit shaping up, it's time to take another look at how the end of the transition period is going to affect what is going to affect all of us, food prices in the UK, using a snazzy little tool on the government website, if you'd be interested. But first, if you'd like to be notified of daily news and politics, please subscribe to the channel and click the bell notification icon. So, as a third country, the UK will have import tariffs collected on our goods passing into the EU if we do not agree a free trade deal. The Canada-style deal that Boris Johnson keeps banging on about is, of course, quite impossible, just on time constraints alone, if not politically, because it doesn't have zero tariffs on everything. The Brexiteers keep billing the fact, well, it's got zero tariffs on most things. Yes, most things. The vast majority of things, in fact, but not everything, which means you have to go through everything to decide which commodities should have tariffs placed on them and which should not, and then of the ones that should, what those tariffs should be. That takes a lot of years. So essentially, we either get a free trade deal where there are no tariffs on everything, or we get nothing. Now, given Boris Johnson's attempt to unilaterally rewrite the treaty, it looks like we get nothing, unless there is a massive and very public climb down. Now, under the circumstances where we get nothing at all, the EU would, of course, be compelled to apply tariffs on our exports to them. Now, the message on what we would do in return has changed over time. It's switched between different positions because neither of them is really good. You know, it's tricky. We can either apply tariffs on EU goods according to World Trade Organization terms or not. Just let everything through as normal. Both of them have their pros and cons. So in the first case, so if we apply tariffs on EU goods in line with WTO terms, so that what that means is that increasing the cost of items that we depend upon, such as, food, medicines, chemicals for treating drinking water, and the always essential toilet roll. Now that would result in an immediate consequence of Brexit that nobody could ignore. 1st of January, you immediately know Brexit is happening. So there was a time when the government thought, actually, it's probably better to avoid this eye-opening event for many people. What we ideally want is for the Brexit transition to happen seamlessly so that people don't notice. And if there are going to be any jarring effects, we'd rather the bulk of the population didn't notice. So we just won't apply tariffs to EU goods coming into the country, or at least not on the noticeable stuff. But, number two, if we don't apply import tariffs to EU goods, then there are a couple of unfortunate consequences. So according to WTO rules, we'd also have to scrub tariffs on the same types of goods coming in from all third countries. If we didn't, then we'd have an argument on our hands. And if that argument happened to involve goods coming in from, say, the United States or China, particularly, there are other countries as well, then we'd have a major argument on our hands that we are unlikely to win. Another problem is that we'd have nothing to negotiate with. So obviously we are now having to seek trade deals with virtually everyone. So if we try to get a free trade agreement with any other country, or continue trying to get one with the EU, because remember, if we leave the transition period without a deal with the EU, that's not all there is to it. There is no, we just won't have a deal with the EU then. We need one. It just means we won't have one in time. We'll have to spend a long time and in a much weakened position trying to get one. But under those circumstances, the negotiations would be fairly predictable. We'd like a free trade agreement, please. Oh yes, what will you give in return? Well, if you don't apply tariffs to our goods, we won't apply them to your goods. You already don't apply tariffs to our goods, so you're not really offering anything there. And that would be the problem. So the current thinking of government switched from that to the position where we're going to apply tariffs. So that is now the position. Now, this is a government that shifts its position all the time, but, I don't think they're going to change that at this late stage. They've even posted a schedule and a nice little tool, which I'll link in the description below, where you can type in whatever commodities you are interested in, and it will tell you what the situation is. I will warn you, it is very comprehensive, so you'll need to be specific. For example, when I just tried to type in something as simple as fruit, The first things I was getting with yogurts with bits of fruit in. So you might have to be fresh fruit or something like that. There are even certain types of fruit that have slightly different ones as well. But what we can see is, so generally speaking for fresh fruit, you know, we'd have a minimum of 8% import tariffs on them. It can increase, there can be more, but 8% as a minimum. For cheese, it's based on weight. So it's a different approach to the tariffs there rather than value. So it's not just a percentage increase. So one example, one of the cheaper examples is £154 per 100 grams. So that'd be like an extra 77 pence on a half kilo block of cheese. Vegetables typically have about a 14% tariff on them. So fruit and veg is going to be particularly important because that's one of our immediate concerns. For those on low incomes, from this point of view, I'm less concerned about those of us who can afford the higher prices. This isn't moaning about, you know, our posh stuff, posh imports costing a bit more. I didn't look at foodstuffs that you'd normally only see in the baskets of the reasonably well off. Frankly, my grocery bill could double and I'd still get the same basket of goods. As long as I could physically get them, as long as there weren't shortages. If it was just that the price doubled, I would still get them. Annoying, but manageable. I'm chiefly concerned with those who cannot afford to feed themselves properly as it is. People for whom even an extra few pounds added to the weekly shop will see them needed to take some items out of the basket. You know, I was in that position once, and if the cost of my basket of goods went up by even 50p worth of stuff would be going out of the basket. That was how tight it was. And we import almost all of our fresh fruit and veg during winter. Exactly the time when our untested and unready customs arrangements need to be used in order to get anything into the country. Which is another dimension to it. But first, just to make that point really clear, what this will result in is obviously one major problem of poverty is not just not being able to get enough food, but not being able to get enough nutritious food. So I talk about fresh fruit and veg. Now, a lot of people in food poverty already cannot afford very much, if anything, in terms of fresh fruit and veg, because it's already very expensive. So even increasing, you might think, oh, a bag of oranges, if it goes up by about 12p, that's not a big deal. Well, it is a big deal for some people. That would mean that they can't get them. And the same with a lot of fruit and veg in general. It means they can't get them. So you're looking at baked beans and chips, which is not really healthy for every meal. But that other dimension to it, so that is one level of increased cost, the tariffs. And as I say, someone who's reasonably affluent, who might moan if the bills go up, but you can afford them. You look at the tariffs applied, and even some of the high ones, like 40% on the cost of something. You look at that and you go, well, I can afford that. Yeah, it's going to make it a lot more expensive, but I can afford it. There was even an article I was reading that talked about, okay, well, there is a bright side because there's more people with this COVID have been looking at buying more locally anyway and supporting their local agriculture and stuff like that. Yeah, that's for affluent people. People in poverty already get the cheapest they can. It's not a case of choosing what to get as such. They get the cheapest they can to fill, you know, their family as much as they can. But there are extra layers of cost as well, because the tariffs is only part of the story. Other two major factors which are related to transport. So no matter what happens, and even in the highly unlikely event now that we get a free trade agreement, we will still lose frictionless trade because we're not going to be in the EU's customs union. Now that means more paperwork. Paperwork has to, I say more paperwork, some paperwork, they don't at the moment have to be any. So paperwork will be needed to transport goods. Now that means that the companies involved in the supply chain at certain points need to pay people to do that paperwork, and there's fees attached to that paperwork as well. So there are costs attached to that paperwork that at the moment doesn't exist and is about to exist. That obviously is going to increase the cost of transport because those companies cannot absorb those costs. Their profit margins are already very poor in a lot of these companies. So that gets passed on to the retailer. Then the retailer can't absorb those costs either because their profit margins are certainly quite thin. So it will be passed on to the consumer. And then the second thing is, so our customs arrangements, such as they are not actually going to be ready. They're not ready right now. Some of them are not even being tested until a few weeks beforehand. And when you test what is already being described as a massively bloated system, it's not a streamlined system, it's not an efficient system. It's got multiple components in it. Straight away, for every system you have, you've got potential problems with it, teething problems, errors. And we're connecting multiple systems together. Every time you connect two systems together, you'll have a whole set of new problems. We're connecting about 10 systems together. They're not really tested. Certainly not tested together. Some of them haven't even been built yet. Some of the systems have not actually been completed to the point where they can even be tested. So it's not going to work for the end of this year, that is certain. In which case we're going to have rather more friction than would otherwise be the case. There will always be some friction. You can look at, for example, the border between Switzerland and the EU. They've got a free trade agreement. But there's still friction at that border. And it's quite horrendous at times. We will have a worse situation because we've got all the same expected friction plus unexpected friction. Well, we expect it, but the government don't. So it was revealed this week, for example, that the government haven't even released the funds necessary to update some of the infrastructure needed at Dover. Not even released the funds. And you think to yourself, so how does Boris Johnson and Michael Gove think this works? Do they think, you know, when you need a construction job done, it works like one of those annoying mobile games? You know, yeah, you can start the job and it'll take a while to work, or you can just chuck a quid in and it'll happen magically immediately. It's not actually how construction projects work in reality, of course. So that will mean even more delays, which of course increases, yet again, the transport costs. Again, those costs cannot be absorbed by the transport companies, so it'll be passed on to the retailers, and then the retailers can't absorb them, so they will pass them on to the consumers. So you've got tariffs, paperwork-based costs, and transport delays-based costs all added on, and that doesn't even include the issues around scarcity due to shortages potentially whacking up the price as well. So there we go. Fun times. Hope you found the video interesting. If you did, don't forget to click the like button. If you'd like to support the channel further, please also click the Patreon link for details. And until next time, I'll see you later.